students, this is Anti-Social Studies AP European History Edition. I'm Emily Poole, and it's time to talk about Unit 4, which is Scientific, Philosophical, and Political Developments. So far in our first 3 units of study, all of that began with this revival of learning, this revival of these Greek and Roman texts, which really started to transform European society. In Unit 1, we talked about how that transformed things with the Renaissance and with exploration. In Unit 2, we talked about Protestant Reformation. In Unit 3, we talked about some political changes. Things are still going to change in Europe as a result of that new learning, and that definitely is true for this Unit 2. So my Unit 3 foreshadowing was, how are all of these things, how are these turning points, these marker events going to impact society, culture, science, and politics? And my guiding question for this unit is, hey, what are some major continuities and changes in religious beliefs, society, technology, and politics as a result of these 2 new marker events, the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment? I'm going to keep going on with that analogy that I came up with last time. The TVA, right? There's like one main line that's supposed to happen, but then these like major events happen and everyone's going off of the lines. That is a great way to actually visualize what continuity and change means as a historical thinking skill, right? You have kind of one thing that is staying the same always, but then these like marker events happen that really start to change things in society. That's been true for every unit that we've talked about so far, and that's definitely true for these 2 marker events that we're going to talk about today, scientific revolution and the Enlightenment. So on this slide here, this is actually a photo that I show my students whenever we talk about this time period as I address these new concepts, these new marker events in history. Early modern Europeans challenged traditionally held sources of power from the 1500s to the 1700s. Because they are now more literate than they used to be, because they're now more socially aware than they used to be, a lot of things change, right? The masses now have this new literacy, and with it, and with this new education, they really start to challenge essentially the power of the Catholic Church or the way that things have been for a long time. We definitely saw that play out in Unit 1 with the Renaissance, in Unit 2 with Martin Luther and the challenging of the Catholic Church with the Protestant Reformation, and that's going to continue to happen here. Early modern Europeans are going to challenge those traditionally held views of the cosmos, essentially what the church has declared to be true about science with their new scientific findings. And early modern Europeans are going to challenge the power of the government. Man, what's the point of the government? What's the purpose of it? Why does it exist? Where does the governmental leader get his source of power? And that definitely plays out with the Enlightenment. So those are 2 foci for this unit. Now, think back to Unit 1. There's been this revival of learning, this printing press, this increase in literacy, this knowledge of the rest of the world through travel and trade. All of that by this point, by the 1700s, 1600s, and 1700s, really has settled into and permeated in regular European society. So what we're dealing with when the scientific revolution, and especially when the Enlightenment actually starts to take root in the 1600s and early 1700s, is that Europe as a whole, the common European during this time period, was more literate and more aware than they had been before. And that is going to allow the scientific revolution, the Enlightenment, to take deeper root into European society. So focus for this unit, of course, is CCOT, continuity and change over time as a result of the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment. So I'm going to give these cute little graphs, and I would like you to continue to fill them in as you're learning about this topic in your class. This would also be a really great review before you take your culminating unit exam, whether that's an essay or a multiple choice test or both. So in the scientific revolution, as you're studying through this unit, I want you to focus on 3 main things: the views of the cosmos, medical practices, and reasoning experimentation. And I want you to tell me how those things stayed the same, and also people who then started to change the views of those things. So notably, of course, Galileo and his idea on heliocentrism is going to change and challenge this traditional view of the cosmos. Kepler is going to hold on to it. He's going to say, no, actually, you know what? The Earth is still at the center of the solar system, even though later on he did some brilliant things with space. He does hold on to these very traditional views. Medical practices, oh my gosh, I can go into great detail about medical horrible histories over time and the weird things that people did in order to solve things. The AP history curriculum likes to talk about Galen, who was this Roman doctor, and Galen proposed this idea of the 4 humors. There are 4 liquids essentially in the body that force people to act the way that they do, and that was like the traditionally held view for a very long period of time. And then Vesalius comes along, and says, you know what, I'm actually going to dissect a human for the first time in centuries because I'm going to do so because the Catholic Church has said that I can do so now. And he discovers, I don't know, the circulatory system. And that, of course, is going to definitely challenge Galen's view of these four humors. And then with reasoning and experimentation, Francis Bacon rolls up on the scene and comes up with a scientific method that you are all familiar with because you have probably used it at some point in one of your science classes. With the Enlightenment, there are also a lot of continuities and changes in this unit. And the four that I think would be helpful to focus on are natural rights, equality, the type and purpose of government, and then the justification of rule of leaders. So John Locke starts to say, hey, you know what? Actually, every person, every human is born with natural rights, life, liberty, and property. The Americans changed that in the American Revolution. New ideas of equality start to be espoused, specifically around women, right? This continues back this freaking centuries old debate about women and the purpose of women and the roles that women should have. Mary Wollstonecraft, this bottom right picture here, says that women only appear to be inferior to men because they lack access to education that men have. And Rousseau, of course, says, no, a woman's only purpose is to rear children and stay in the home, of course. Types of government also start to be challenged and questioned. We have some people who really support absolutism as a specific style of government. Montesquieu says, hey, actually, there should be checks and balances. There should be some kind of separation of powers so that absolute power doesn't corrupt people. And then justification of rule, of course, would go back to Hobbes and Locke. Absolutism, right? Life is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. And then Locke is saying, actually, you know what? People are pretty good. Let's talk about this social contract. The government should exist to protect these rights. And if these rights aren't protected, then the people have the right to, I don't know, overthrow the government. I wonder if that actually happens ever in history. It does. So those are some immediate continuities and changes that happened in Europe as a result of the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment. But on a greater scale, there are other continuities and changes happening during this time period that are specific to this unit. Continuities and changes in religious beliefs. You know what? Most of Europe is still Christian at this point. That is definitely a continuity. But there are some changes to that too as a result of the Enlightenment and as a result of the scientific revolution. The Enlightenment is this focus on rationalism and reason and understanding. And you see a response to that specifically in Germany in the opposite direction. Let's focus on emotional experiences. We call that German pietism. There's this very strong return to the faith as a result of these Enlightenment ideas that are espoused by these Enlightenment philosophers. There's also an increase in deism. Deism is this idea that God created the universe and set it into motion, but then exists in the cosmos kind of up there with his hands folded and is not interacting with human society at all anymore. Deism, this idea that God is a clockmaker. He created everything, but then is absent in human affairs, starts to take root in European society. And then, of course, with this focus on reason, rationalism as a result of the Enlightenment, there is an increase in atheism and skepticism as beliefs as well. Society also changes too. Child mortality decreases. That's because of the scientific revolution and a lot of new things that happen as a result of that, and a lot of new inventions that are created and a lot of new advances in medicine. And this decrease in child mortality leads to an increase in focus on childhood development. Rousseau notably was a huge proponent for childhood early education. Technology changes too. Inoculation becomes more common, and there are new scientific innovations thanks to this focus on the scientific method, and that, of course, only continues in Europe and then definitely culminates once we get to the Industrial Revolution, which is Unit 6. And then politics change. Of course they do. Some of these new monarchs, most notably in the East, really start to adopt some of these Enlightenment ideas. Consent of the governed, more people should have religious freedom, there should be some kind of toleration existing for all groups of people living within our country. So some foreshadowing leading into our next unit. What's going to happen when these Enlightened ideals take deeper root in regular society? Once it actually settles in over, the course of a couple of generations, how will these new ideas, consent of the governed, the idea of natural rights, start to change Europe? Are some regular people going to look at their government and say, I don't know that this is the best form of government we could have? Who knows? We'll find out next time. But for now, make sure you like and subscribe to Anti-Social Studies YouTube page. You can join our Patreon community at patreon.com/antisocial studies. You can follow us both on Instagram and also on TikTok, where we are both very active. That's it for now, and I'll see y'all next time.